large land beam on the outside. It doesn't extend out from the building, so it's not one of those kind of things. It is we do have wood joists for that system with a concrete topping, perforated metal ceiling on that. So we're asking for a variance to allow sprinkler protection at each of those in lieu of providing 1 hour assemblies. Issues as potential water intrusion and other conditions that are concerns in an exterior condition where you've got wood construction. So we believe this will meet the intent of the code, but we'll avoid having problems with water being trapped in that cavity. It's a short length, about, I think it's around 30 feet long, about 5 feet wide, 6 feet wide.
Would it be rude if I ask a question?
No.
What is concrete topping? I mean, is it
It's
like
like a-
thin layer?
It's a light gypcrete, as I understand it, where it's lightweight concrete.
I mean, it's not like you have to pour forms in.
They're doing 3 inches thick.
There we go.
Because I bet Scott can tell us exactly.
It's
how
just a
that's done.
different makeup of the aggregate cement ratio. Does that make
That's
sense?
where
Lighter
I
weight.
was going.
It doesn't have the weight of regular concrete, but
Right.
it's a fire resistant material.
Okay. Said that twice, and I'm thinking something.
No, it's 3 inches, I believe,
Yeah.
2-3 inches.
Yeah,
I
it's
forget
listed,
what the-
it's listed as 3.
Yeah,
Look, we'll be right on that way.
Probably give you the ACI definitions of
So it's not gonna
versus
sag, it's not gonna be heavy, but it's not gonna work.
But it's gonna.
Yeah.
Okay.
basically suspending the concrete landing on the exterior.
Yeah.
so we will be providing spring protection above and below these balconies. And we do have non-combustible surfaces, party board and so forth, and concrete floor there on the top side.
So if I understand correctly, the variance is in lieu of putting gypsum sheathing on the bottom side, you're putting aluminum. Perforated
A
aluminum.
perforated aluminum ceiling, that's correct. So
Other than that, I mean, you got the waterproofing, you got everything else. There's nothing really that would change if you switched, right?
no, other than things happen on balconies, I think the architect is very nervous about creating an enclosed space there.
The concern with water infiltration, it's gonna damage your wood whether the gypsum's there or not. You know?
You just don't know about it, you can see it.
Perforated aluminum will allow some airflow up there that would allow it to potentially dry out if it does get wet versus gyp that'll just trap it and let mold and fester and.
Sorry, I told you I was gonna shut up and I didn't. Bobby LaRue, Ed and I kind of talked about this for a while. I will point out that we have, in Bloomington, people seem to really like to salt everything to death on these types of walkways. And we have more recently had a failure of connectors and things like this in this kind of deck that oversalted, unobservable, and we had a section of stair fall out between some things. So this is a question about, in my mind, about being able to, dry this and maintain this wood. So it's really kind of a tricky balance for us, right? But it is, if I remember correctly from our discussion, there's a 5A wall, 1 hour here.
Correct.
The columns are 1 hour
That's
protected.
right, I did.
The beam supporting the other end is a heavy timber or laminate type beam with a nice protection. So we're really talking about individual joists that we're going to be sprinkled below and above with a concrete layer on top. So from my mind, it's the balance between the potential for a fire out here and the potential for damage to the structure due to weather. So it seemed to me to be a nice balance of the two in this case.
I'll make a motion to approve C.
Second. Motion and second to approve C. All in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Last variance project is the mechanical code. This has been requested a number of times and approved in one form. The only difference here is that we've got two conditions. One is that we have some locations where we're just 2 feet from an operable window with our bathroom or dryer exhaust outlets. Code requires 3 feet. That particular condition has been addressed and usually isn't recommended for approval. The one that's the difference here is that we do have some 2 exterior wall conditions where we are less than 3 feet from a property line. So the code also stipulates that they have to be at least 3 feet from a property line. So to that point, where we have less than 3 feet to the property line, we have additional public width of public ways. So we are actually the closest word to any other property is 12 feet because we've got an alley to the south, and then to the west we've got a very wide street. So we don't really have, it's adjacent to a property line, but not one in which somebody has another building or can build another building. And then we are maintaining 2 feet for the other vents in accordance with from the openings, as it's been approved on several other projects, and I've listed those there. The other point to make here quickly is that this is not a fire rating issue based on, I've cited the section in the code that says if you have a sprinkler system, you don't have to separate vertical openings in an exterior wall. If we're not addressing a fire transmission issue, it's just odor transmission. So
Ed, are these windows required to be?
some of them are fixed and some are operable. But yeah, the ones that are operable, though, we do need those to be
Okay.
operable. Yeah, not for egress purposes, but yeah, for ventilation.
Okay, well, I guess I didn't, if they're not for egress, I didn't know if the lower sash was fixed and was operable up top, if that met the requirement.
Yeah, I think in some of the cases we'd have an issue with either one, but
Okay.
it's
I was curious.
layered in there.
Probably some accessibility issues too there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Second.
All right. A motion to accept and a second. All in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. 230245 ABCDEFG University of Notre Dame.
Ed Rensink, our campus.
That should be South Bend, not Notre Dame, Indiana.
Notre Dame is,
Notre Dame.
Okay, chief.
and I have with me the best dressed fire chief in the state of Indiana.
At least today. That's what it says on the FBS, so that's what I put on the agenda.
Oh, thought you were located in South Bend.
Actually, Notre Dame has its own zip code.
Yeah.
Outstanding.
Yeah,
Notre Dame,
it is its
Indiana.
own city.
Its own city?
Well, it's.
Yeah.
It's a thing.
Notre
Okay.
Dame.
It's unincorporated.
I mean, I know they think it is.
Years ago, that Tri-Campus, Holy Cross, St. Mary's in Notre Dame is they put a post office in it, and it's a recognized entity.
Ah.
So we've got, let me see. I believe all of these are
All
in
of these are
category
C.
C, is that right? Yeah. All right, so the project involves the construction of a 4-story plus basement building. It's a Research 2 building. It will be, Research 1 is McCourtney Hall, which will adjoin by a pedestrian walkway. So we've got that in one of the variances there, but that's why it's called Research 2. I suppose somebody else will put their name on this one eventually. So the building will include, it's very similar to the one next door. It'll have research labs, classrooms, office and administrative space, some support functions. Again, we'll have the pedestrian walkway to McCourtney Hall. In this case, it is all a B occupancy. We actually don't have any classrooms with 50 or more people, so it is a B occupancy. 1B construction, so we've got 2-hour structural frame and floors everywhere. So the first variance is from 713.12. This is to allow this is the 1989 variance I was telling you about.
I noticed.
Mentioned. Okay, this was the first time I ever got this was on a research building at Lilly where we had to get this variance. But the building code, both the IBC, the UBC and the IBC recognize a condition where you can have a mechanical room or, well, it doesn't say this, is to a purpose related to the shaft. 99 times out of 100, it's a mechanical room. But you can have a mechanical room in the basement and it can be open to you. You can have all your shafts open to that mechanical room. Code allows that. But the IBC doesn't recognize the inverted situation where you would have a room at the top of a space where the mechanical room is at the top. And that's where I've cited the NFPA 101, and I included that code reference that allows that condition at the top of the shaft as well, and that's what we're proposing. We have 2 mechanical rooms on the top floor of the building. The reason we wouldn't need this variance if we were calling it a penthouse. We can't call it a penthouse because on this building, they've designed a area of business occupancy in the middle of that 4th floor. So I can't call that level a penthouse because it's got something other than mechanical equipment. So we have a 4-story building. I'm having to address a couple of issues associated with that, with those mechanical rooms because of that condition. And when in reality, it's virtually identical to the penthouse next door on McCourtney Hall. So this condition would occur there. Here I need a variance because it's technically a story under the code and not a penthouse. And a penthouse, in the concept of a penthouse in the code, it's just a box on the roof that covers up their mechanical equipment. You can basically just run shafts up into a penthouse and you've protected the rest of the building by virtue of shaft construction, fire dampers and so forth. And then you just dump it up into your penthouse because typically in a research building, you're gonna have all these exhaust shafts and that sort of thing. And it'll be a terrible mess to try to protect any of that up in the penthouse. I mean, nobody will do that. It's every mechanical room on the top of a research building is gonna be done this way. It's just, in this case, we need a variance. So we are, in referencing the NFPA standard, we will have 2-hour construction separating what we're doing is separating the office area up on the top floor with 2-hour fire barriers. We'll also have the 2-hour floors. So these mechanical rooms are completely separated from the rest of the building with 2-hour construction. And of course, the shafts are 2-hour rated. They have dampers and so forth, where they originate, or in some cases, typically what we do with these lab exhausts, we'll run what I call express shafts, because you're not allowed to put fire dampers in those. So you run separate shafts from each floor up into the penthouse. So you're achieving your separation that way. And the building is sprinklered per NFPA 13. And I've explained kind of the condition involved to some extent here in the statement of undue hardship is the fact that you really can't. You really can't protect individually all those shafts up into a mechanical space like that when it's functionally basically as a penthouse.
Keep going, or you want a motion?
I'm happy to take a motion if you're ready.
Make the motion to approve.
Second. All right. Motion and second to approve variance A. All in favor, signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
So the second variance addresses the same space, and for the same reason that in the previous variance, it's functionally basically a penthouse. Next door, McCartney Hall doesn't have fireproofing in the penthouse because the code doesn't require it. We're creating a condition where it functionally is a penthouse. We're separating the office area with 2-hour construction. We just have air handling in this space, and I should have added, we don't have any fuel-fired equipment or gas equipment up there. It's really just air handling equipment, exhaust fans and so forth.
I will note that the local fire chief supported this variance based on it being type 1B construction. Now you're asking not to be 1B on the 4th story.
It is what it is.
So,
Work with me, I'm just a fire chief. That's it. I might end up crabby, who knows?
and we are sprinkling protection in this space.
Move to approve B.
Second.
Motion and second to approve variance B. All in favor, signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you. Variance C is for the pedestrian walkway connection. The only reason we need a variance is because technically we won't have sprinklers on each side of this door to McCartney Hall. So we're using the existing front door of McCartney Hall at that end of the pedestrian walkway. McCartney Hall is sprinklered, our new building is sprinklered, the pedestrian walkway is sprinklered. We are going to add closed space sprinklers where we can within our new construction in the immediate adjacency of that door, but we don't want to have to get in and tear up McCartney Hall to try to get sprinklers on the other side of that existing door.
You okay with that?
Yeah, we've done a similar approach to this on another connected building not too long ago. And I think it worked.
I'll make a motion to approve C.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve C is submitted. All in favor, signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you. Variance D addresses a typical, I would say at this point, a typical Notre Dame variance where we've
Move to
had.
approve D.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve variance D. All in favor, signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
This is variance E. This is a variance to allow exterior openings in the adjacency to exterior openings in the enclosed stairs. So if you have a stair enclosure, you have non-rated openings in a stair enclosure, you measure 10 feet over, and if you have any other openings in the building, then you either have to rate one or the other openings. We're asking to instead protect the opening in the building with an extra sprinkler at that opening. So basically the issue is they don't want to, you have a rated enclosure for a stairway, they don't want fire to transmit from the building over against a stairway and compromise the stairway. So we're adding that sprinkler that's been done on some other Notre Dame projects and a whole bunch of other ones. We've listed the previous similar variances there in the variance application.
Move to approve E.
Second?
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve E as submitted. All in favor, signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Okay, variance F is the standpipe outlets. Chief wants them on the main floor.
Move to approve.
What you want, right?
Yeah, that'll work.
Motion and a second. All in favor, signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
That gets us to the final one, G. This is you have seen this one before, it's sort of confusing, but I'll try to explain it as quickly as I can. When you have a convenience opening, and we've got that between the first and second floor, it's basically just a hole in the second floor where you can look down into the first floor. among all of the other stipulations that permit that kind of a floor opening, one of them is you have to have rated construction to separate that from any other vertical opening in the building. So we've got a 5-story exit access stair that connects all floor levels, permitted by code with bulkheads and sprinklers. So we need a variance because we don't have rated construction separating this 2-story opening from the 5-story opening. We are adding a bulkhead and sprinklers, draft curtain sprinklers at that opening. If I had a stair in that 2-story opening, I wouldn't need a variance. So it's sort of a little anomaly in the code that if I don't have a stair in it, then I have to go to 712.1.8 that has that stipulation.
You said you're doing draft stop and extra sprinklers.
Yeah, we'll have a draft stop at the ceiling of the first floor for that floor opening with a row of close space sprinklers. Treat it like it was a stairway, an open stairway. Yeah.
Second.
Motion is second to approve G. All in favor, signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Chief.
A little late for lunch though, huh? Sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
We still have more work to do, so
Well, I'll think of you when I'm driving.
we're only halfway done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll do 8 and 9 on the agenda.
I was gonna say, you want to take 60 seconds, talk about 8?
Yeah, that's fine with that. Yes. All right, report on administrative review.
All right, so we do have one proposed order from ALJ. I believe this is a recommended dismissal. Just needs the commission's sign off.
Move to affirm the dismissal.
Second.
Motion to affirm, all in favor signify with aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
And we have no post-adoption ordinances pending review this time.
So, just out of curiosity, the gentleman that submitted all of these code change proposals, is he present? Either online or in person? I'm just wondering, because we tabled them last month, we ran out of time. Proponent wasn't here to present on behalf of them. I'm trying to figure out if we need to take an hour lunch and come back just to say that nobody's here yet. So
So one person submitted all these plumbing code ones?
I believe these were all submitted by the same person, weren't they?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, we can still discuss them without them.
All right, so let's take lunch then.
I think summaries we can knock out.
Yeah.
All right, we'll take lunch.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So we really have a deadline of April 4 to get all the code change requests in for the building code, is that right?
Calendar.
April 5th.
Yeah. Oh, an extra day, or at least. We
Better get that intern hired.
You know, I'm gonna feel like a little Dutch boy, putting his fingers in the dike on this, because I think there's not a lot. Last time I looked, there's not a lot going on. Building code changes, I just wonder.
Well, there might be some discussion later on this afternoon on moving forward. We'll see.
You're trying to entice me to stay, aren't you?
You know, that's, you can attend virtually. on your own.
I'll probably do that. I'll tune it in probably, because I've got stuff. I'm just curious. You know, on some of these codes, it's not a big deal, but boy, the building code just seems like, you know, I understand not doing it with the committee, believe me. I spent 2 years on the committee in the last cycle, and it's not upsetting me to not have to do that. But I think we'll have a mess on any fiscal impact analysis.
Let's wait until we get back from lunch to discuss.
All right, I'll be tuned in and I'll listen.
All right, it's 1:09. Let's come back at 2:15.
All right.
Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. It's
You got it.
2:15.
We're green.
We're back from lunch, back on the record. So, next up on the agenda is code change proposals. For the fuel gas code, the 2021 International Fuel Gas Code, we received 0 code change proposals. I imagine that's probably going to present some challenges later on. So before we get into the plumbing code, additional code changes, I want to have a kind of an overall, a bigger discussion amongst the commissioners as to how this code change process is working so far. So there's a few things going on. One, as we saw with the fuel gas code, we've received nothing. As of 2:15 or so, we received 8 for the mechanical code. I believe that's what she said. Yeah, and that deadline's less than 2 hours away, or about a little over 2 hours away. So I'm wondering if there's some kind of miscommunication or confusion on the part of the industry and on stakeholders about submitting code change proposals, because we're not getting a lot of the ones that we've typically gotten historically. So that's one aspect. And another aspect is there is currently some legislation working its way through its process that could potentially affect the rulemaking as well, both regarding our body specifically, as well as there's a rulemaking bill as well, House Bill 1623, I think, which could impact rulemaking from its how it's handled. And then I guess the last thing to kind of discuss is, I've heard some heartburn from folks in the industry about not having the code change committees, the code review committees rather, that we've had historically. And, here we are in March of 2023, about 6 months from now, the 2024 codes are going to be published. So we're reviewing the 21 codes before the 24s are about to come out. So I just want to kind of get your guys' thoughts on things. Scott, am I missing something? I feel like you're.
No.
Okay.
That's kind of the.
Yeah, just kind of get your thoughts, everybody's thoughts on how we continue moving forward with this. Or if we consider perhaps putting it on hiatus until we see what if any legislative changes come July 1st. But just kind of want to get to everyone's thoughts on things.
I mean, feeling like we might be beating a dead horse at this moment, or?
I think there's a good chance that if any of this legislation moves forward in some shape or form, it's going to either impact the makeup of the commission or how, when codes can be updated, as in it may restrict the number of codes that could be updated at a certain time, or, there's all kinds of, there's a version that's been approved in the House that actually creates separate commissions for residential uses and some other uses that would then be developing their own codes, but they have limits on the number of codes they could review each year and how often a code could be reviewed. That language is all subject to change as it moves through the process. And so there's a chance that the efforts that we're spending time on now may be for naught, because we may have to start over anyways if that legislation passes. There's also the chance that this legislation dies and we pause and we've wasted 4 months of time not doing anything. But then, like Mike says, now we're getting to the point where we're having a new round of code books about to be issued that are 3 years newer. And by the time we get through this process of getting a 21 code adopted, it may already be 4-5 years out of date, to get through the entire rulemaking process. So do we now, kind of like with the residential code, where we paused and then
Went from the 15 to
went to
the
the
18.
15 to the 18 because of the timing and the changes that were made to the to the group at the time.
Always for the community staying most current if possible. If it's possible for us to pause to get the most current code in front of us, to me, that's a good thing because that's something new will be most current and be in the newest books. I do agree with the legislation. I do agree that there could be some changes that possibly could happen, which could directly impact the work that has been put in, and it still may pause us. So
I mean, I guess the other thing to consider, like you heard Ed talking before he left, he may spend a considerable amount of time trying to document proposed code changes for a building code to be heard in May, to then have it get shut down in end of June when legislation gets passed. And so is that fair to our constituents to put that effort in on their part as well, knowing that this could all go another way?
in my opinion, no. In my opinion, I think we, at minimum, pause to see what legislation does. Whether or not we continue to pause until a new code book comes out 6 months later, I think we can discuss that at that time. But
Well, and if we were to pause to see what happens with the legislature, I don't know when the session ends, but we would, in the next few months, we would have an idea of what's going to go into effect on July 1st, if it goes into effect. And then based on what that is, we would at least have an opportunity to say, okay, we're going to continue moving forward now, or we're going to pivot to the 2024, or we're going to, recognize that the building code and the fire code are such heavy lifts that perhaps we go back to a traditional code review committee to some extent. I'm just I've heard from a lot of different stakeholders across the industry, and there seems to be a lot of concern about the speed in which we're reviewing these. There seems to be some misperceptions. I've heard from a couple different sources that they're under the belief that we're adopting a new code every month, that we adopted a new plumbing code last month, we're adopting a new fuel gas code today. Clearly, that's not how rulemaking works. But there is a perception out there that some folks believe that, and that's what is causing a lot of concern. At the same time, I understand, when you have a head of steam, sometimes you don't want to let up too much if you don't have to. But I think in this case, it might be best served for both the commission and in the industry as well, that we might slow down a bit.
The downside to all that is that if we move to a 24 code, we're probably going to have a 14-year period between codes being updated. I mean, we're in the 2012s now. Even if we start with the 24, that's probably a good
middle of 25.
Yeah, that's a good.
Yeah.
And then isn't it now 6 months before it goes into effect?
That's part of something that's been proposed.
So it's potentially another 2 whole years from the time we start, before those codes go into effect. So you're
how much of a
talking,
difference is that between if we continued with the 21? Because
Not
the 21,
much.
we would still have to go through the process.
right.
And
And that's exactly,
it may only be 6 months longer than would have been to adopt the
yeah, it could
21.
potentially be 6 or 9 months longer, but we have a model code that's 3 years newer at the end of
Did
it.
you find out when the 24 codes are going to hit the ground, or?
I don't know specifically. Historically, ICC starts publishing them in September.
And are they all published at once, or is
It's
that a rolling
usually
calendar?
staggered. It's usually staggered throughout the fall.
Hey,
So I
Chairman
think we
Poppins,
would have- Yes.
Brian Lancaster, can I make a comment about the codes? Is that okay?
Sure.
No, I agree with what you're saying. I think, but if you have amendments that people propose to you for 2021, if nothing's really changed to the 24s, if you guys approve the amendments, just put them in the 24, that'd be a much easier task for all of you as well, I would think, if that makes sense.
I don't necessarily disagree, but without having the 24 code in front of me, I don't know how much of the stakeholders' time and how much the commission time I want to expend reviewing those.
That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Makes sense as long as there's not substantial changes
Agreed.
from one version to the next.
Does the ICC, do they issue, because I've got a code thing later today with FGI, and we always issue, I think, here's the changes from the previous edition of our guidelines. Do they have that? If we did proceed on some that we might not have as many, there might not need to be a lot of amendments, we move those, maybe shelve them, and if the 24 comes through, and we know what we could push through,
So,
we could use that as our guide of what do we need to revisit in the 2024.
So they do two separate things. The first is that when the 24 code will be published, they'll have notations in the margins indicating where something was added, where something was deleted, or where something was changed or removed. And then additionally, ICC publishes a book of significant changes. The key being significant. It's not going to list every change.
Right.
Go ahead, Shelley.
Shelley Wakefield, when ICC also publishes in the digital edition, all the new text is published in blue. So you know what the change was. And I know the book publications come out a little bit staggered, but the digital are all at once. So I remember the first one was first started out, they were all on the website at that time. If you wanted to purchase the digital copies.
Okay. So there's that as well as a potential resource should we go that route. So I guess my question is right now to the commissioners and to staff, whether, Greg, I know we haven't spoken about this previously, so I'm just kind of springing this on you and on Tyler and Justin and everyone. But, you know, does staff have any initial thoughts that they care to share?
I don't think I have anything that I can say that represents staff. I have my own personal opinions. They may get me in trouble.
Happy to hear them.
I'd be happy to. I am told that the primary impetus for this proposed legislation is the fact that, well, two things. One is that the home builders and apartment builders don't feel like their voice is being heard at the commission level. And second, that there's concern about codes being adopted too rapidly. Personally, I don't know how you can live and work in the state of Indiana and think codes are being adopted too quickly. But having said that, if there is an action or an inaction that the commission consider taking that might take some of the wind out of those sails, personal opinion is that it would be to the benefit of everybody. I understand that, you know, postponing code adoptions just keeps us in a state of getting farther and farther behind. We're already at the point where the annotations in the model codes that delineate changes are going to be limited, if any usefulness to us anyway, because we'd be comparing the 21 or the 24 code to the 2012 model. And there have been many changes that have taken place between those that will never appear with sidebars and blue text in the new publications. So I'm not sure that I see that big a problem in postponing it. Again, this is just my personal opinion. And as far as the process itself, I understand the desire to come up with a process that's more streamlined, more efficient, and less time consuming. Considering the size and complexity of some of these documents, I'm not sure, in my opinion, that that's really the wisest approach to take with them. I know it's a huge investment in time for the commission and for the agency to provide support staff and for whomever gets named to code adoption committee to spend a year, or in some cases 2 years, to go through these page by page. But I think that's probably the best way to ensure that we have something, a finished product that reflects what the building industry of Indiana really needs. That's all I'll say.
The only question I
appreciate that.
have is,
Thank
does this pause impact the grant funding that the agency has received to do this work?
And that's an excellent question, because with the BRIC funding received from the federal government, I don't know what kind of deadlines there are to use that.
Our performance period runs to mid-2025, I believe. So, I
To
mean,
be
we have some
completed
to
or to be?
be completed.
Okay.
So we're pretty hard up against that already.
But it's still.
It's theoretically doable.
It's feasible. Yes, definitely a heavy lift, but feasible. You know, I've taken part personally in the residential code committee and the electrical code committee. So I saw the amount of work that went into those two. And I was happy to try something new. I like the idea of streamlining and trying to do things as efficiently as possible. I don't know that that's working. And that's, aside from the outside pressure and the legislative action and potentially, I see what happened with the plumbing code. I'm looking at a fuel gas code that I know there has to be amendments to, because there's language that conflicts with things that we adopt, the GAR and whatnot. So I know that there have to be amendments. I know that the mechanical code, so far we have 8 amendments, and I'd be shocked if we get any more in the next 2 hours. And to do building and fire, I have concern over the undue pressure that puts on people to do something that we don't get the well thought out process that Craig alluded to, and then we're still trying to play catch up later. Please.
A couple of thoughts from my perspective. I think there could, I guess the first thought is the old saying, don't let perfection be the enemy of progress, with trying to get the most current code, because states all over the country use different versions of the code, and we're one of the longest use of the oldest code, right? So just by getting to 2021 would be progress, and the 2027 code or whatever, down the road, we can jump to that in the future. And 2024 may not be the end of the world not to get that one updated. That's one thought. The second thought is there seems to be potential iterations of what we're doing, where we may be in one iteration where we're kind of soliciting public comment on the new codes that we're looking at. The second iteration, or we could flip it, is looking at previous amendments as a commission and just filtering through those before we get public comment. And that may filter out a lot of public comment on the codes. So one thought I've had as we've gone through part of the plumbing code is that maybe it's not a one and done review, but maybe it's like, okay, we do one iteration, get to the end and say, okay, now we got to go back and review it in a different perspective with the historical context of our amendments, or some form, in that form, to keep progress moving.
And I think there was always the intent that we would have to go back and do a cleanup round on all these, just to make sure that they're talking to each other correctly. I mean, when you approve something in the building code that affects another code, you're going to need to go back to clean it all up. And then when we get to these codes we've never had before, like existing building, and if we get to the energy code, what do those do to our other codes that we've been through, and force us to take a second look. So I don't think the intent was ever to be one and done. It was just a way to try and get the public comment in within a reasonable time frame, so that we could take it under advisement, then we could act on those things as part of our review of those codes.
And just, I'm not saying that we go with the 2024. That's not really what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we have something coming in the next few months that may change the course that we're on. And I think we need to pause to find that before we waste time and have to revisit this without that information. But once that comes in, I think that's when we come together and say, all right, are we going to progress forward with what we have in hand, which will be the 2021? Or are we going to wait till the new version comes out? I think that's a decision we make then. But by all means, we like you said, we have a 2012 now trying to do, that's progress. But I think what we have in front of us now with the legislature, we have to think about what might change over that time.
During that time, we could also keep accepting code change proposals and put out new dates for when we're gonna look at each code. That would give the public 4 months or whatever
Additional time.
to submit those. Because obviously the building code is a big concern and the fire code is a big concern.
So, that's
Even
So just to that one in particular, we could just push the current timeline as it stands past the end of the legislative period. Just
Yeah, 1 month is what we're looking at.
The last day of session is published as April 29th.
So, I mean, it wouldn't be hard to just push everything back a month. But secondarily, one of the points that I wanted to raise, one of the reasons that we moved away from the subcommittee model, and it's been a while, I've slept since then, I may be misremembering this, but you can probably attest this too, is that when we were doing the subcommittee model, we attempted to get suggestions from industry as to who could sit on those subcommittees. And if I remember correctly, one of the problems that we were facing is we couldn't get certain positions or buy-in in the subcommittee model just because people weren't responding to us. I believe on the electrical code, we started off with 11 suggested members and we had to like condense 2 of them because we couldn't find people to fit it in, and the commission had to go back and redo the bylaws for it to change the makeup. So, I mean, if we go back to that model, that's something that we would need to address as well, I guess.
Yeah, well, and I think if a call for committees were put out, then we could see where we're at.
Okay.
You know, I would be quite surprised to see that we didn't have people interested in taking part in fire and building. You know, at that point, it's a matter of balancing, you know, to make sure that the different interests are served, to make sure that all stakeholders have their voice heard. And that's where I think a lot of the concern is stretching from now.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't go back to it. I'm just saying like, that's a thing to keep in mind as we consider the future model.
I think the stakeholders can, my personal opinion, we should keep moving forward, just because it's, you know, the questions I get, like you said, we're in the 2012 code, you know, even if we adopted the 21, I think that would be better than nothing, and get us moving forward to then adopt another code cycle shortly after that one. The changes, I think that, and I think you're correct when you look at the changes, you know, we can address those. And if we know the session's going to be relatively short, and if anything does change, obviously we'll have to adapt to that. And I think as far as the commission goes, you know, I would take another board, you know, I mean, those stakeholders can come to any one of us to address their concerns, and they should come to us to address concerns with the code or bring revisions, amendments to the code to someone here. And communication is the key to get it out there to people, you know, to say, hey, here's what we're doing. Yeah, I think the timeline of us trying to get through is pretty rapid, I guess, trying to get through, and especially with some of the codes. I think some of these, you know, obviously you're gonna have to come back and look at these again, like you stated, but, you know, I think some of these can be addressed before July and hold off on some of the bigger codes till after and see what's gonna happen, but yeah, I still look at things and, you know, you get people coming in here for the commission, you know, for the commission meetings going, well, you know, in the 2021 code, or 2018 code, we could do this. And I said, wow, you're right.
The rulemaking process, once you've all agreed upon what the amendments will be, once that's done, you have another whole process of rulemaking, which is outlined on the commission's webpage in a very nice flow chart. That process can take approximately 1 year. From the date of publication in the Indiana Register, the signing by the governor can take 1 year. So you have a year of committee work, a year of adoption process. You're into 26 possibly. I agree with wait until the 24, because, you know, we've always lagged behind. That's been an Indiana norm ever since I've been doing this over 40 years. One time we were always up to date. In the 80s, we were always up to date with the codes. That ceased. So you've got to balance this with the new code coming in 24. Committee work if you want to do it, public hearings. That rule processing is almost a year. So you're looking at an extended period. I understand that. Everybody keeps forgetting the rule process that takes place after all the amendments are written.
I mean, the other option is you pause now and you start forming all the committees between now and September. So that the minute those codes are published, we're starting. And not wait till September to get the codes and then start forming the committees, which takes 3 months by the time they find the members, get them to agree, get them presented to the commission for approval as a committee member. I mean, that's the other option is we start, you know, July 1, we start forming committees to
At least to have it in place.
That as soon as the 2024 code is issued, they're going to work. And that gives DHS staff the time to get people in place and get ready for it because, you know, on day 1, we're starting committee meetings.
I like that thought because you're right in that when we look back historically, you know, it's okay, one meeting, there's a motion to draft bylaws and start forming a committee. And then the second month, it's reviewing the bylaws and discussing the people who've applied. And then the third month, it's naming the members of the committee. And now we're 3 months in. Whereas if that work started now.
And so between now and July, we set a framework that each committee is going to have representation by these groups, like we did with the code study committee. Here's the list of groups. Are we missing anybody? Get that input, and then that's our base committee for each one. Maybe we add an extra member that is another industry expert in that particular field, whether it's buildings, you know, fire, whatever, mechanical, and have that whole framework set, and so that when these books are published, we're going, and not then first starting to play the game of making rules, picking people, and taking time, and finding staff.
I think setting the schedule would have to wait until the books.
Right.
So, yeah. But I think if we have.
Getting the commitments from people and
If we
everything
have
else.
bylaws in place and we have approved members in place, then it's just a matter of time before the books are ready to go, and then we can give them their charge and move forward.
And then, you know, the public has to understand that you're gonna have to track multiple committees if you want to get your comments into, I mean, you're using the web portal, but you may have 4 committees meeting in a week. If you want to be involved in all of them and hear what's going on, you're going to be spending your time to monitor 4 committees instead of 1 board once a month.
Well, and the answer might be that these committees are meeting more than once a month. I believe the residential code committee was is it every 3 weeks or so maybe? Bobby, do you remember?
I don't, because I was on the first.
Actually, Justin might remember. Mr. Goodell, do you recall by chance? I feel like it was more than once a month, but I don't remember the exact intervals because it's been a few years. But I think before we get to that step, we needed to make a decision and, you know, as a group, decide what we're going to do.
Well, at minimum, I would suggest we pause for 30 days. That gets us to the next meeting. We pause receipt of comments for 30 days. We pause hearing anything for 30 days. And we just pause and see where this legislation is going. I mean, by then, it's to the point where
Will we know,
it's 30 days out.
will we know 30 in early April? We won't know
I
until
mean,
the
we
end
can
of the
come to
session.
April, and if we're still not sure, then we pause for another 30 days.
Continue.
And by then, it has to be done.
We're pausing through the next meeting. We would know before the March meeting comes up because the session will,
Maybe.
for May, sorry. The April, then for May, we would know before the May meeting, sorry. And I was thinking, listening to what Jim said as far as the communication, and you're saying from different groups, again, being on a body that kind of does this, but nationally, the way they've done it to have buy-in from all the different groups, or at least have their participation, isn't necessarily to make committees that have all those subgroups into there, but they have a system that it's a comment system. They call it a comment system because it's not legislation so much, but it would be like if you had the amendment process that we have where people can see it on there. But say that I've seen something on there, oh, okay, I support so-and-so's, you know, and I'm from a different organization. I can put my comments in there, just have to register with like the website, and I put that I'm in support of this or we're in opposition, as opposed to putting in our competing amendment. And I wonder if, and there's a news release put out to all these different trades groups, hey, the comment period is open. It's open for a fairly long time because it's a large, I mean, it's a rather large document. I wonder if it's just they don't think they're getting their chance to, if they want to oppose something or really have it heard, they have to come to the meeting, wait through all our normal business, and then they may not even have that amendment come up, and then they've wasted a day, so they don't show up. I mean, I don't know why they having very few amendments in there, but I'm wondering if their resistance is they don't want to take a whole day to maybe be heard and maybe not. This gives them an option to at least have their position heard, and then that group, what this group does is, and they propose, they give what they call the draft manuscript. It would be like the draft rule, but it wouldn't be a draft rule to what Shelley's talking about. It'd be here's the proposed, the ones that have been proposed, and then people still have a chance to comment on those, so that the group making the final decision knows if there's really a lot of heartburn for what we found out we did something wrong. And I don't know if there's a way to communicate that on what DAS has, where somebody can add in on somebody's additional proposal or amendment and put their support or objection to it, that we could see that the home builders are opposed to something, or is that available on there?
I don't know that it is. I think historically, they've just shown up and provided that public comment. They're not.
Yeah, that's why I was just wondering if there's a way to have them have their voice heard so that you get that buy-in before you're at a public hearing and then they don't like it.
The tool that we're using right now, Smartsheet, does allow for the addition of comments, which is where I've been putting any code proposal that gets accepted with an amendment. The proposal itself remains the same, and then as a comment, we add what the amended language is. So if somebody were to like email the commission box saying that they have a comment, or this page itself could be used to use comments for other publications. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is there are multiple avenues where if people want to have their voices heard publicly in a way that can be archived and researched and like shown to the general public, we have ways of doing that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if they aren't aware of that, or. Yeah. maybe it's a communication thing to let them know, here's how you can have your voice heard. An alternate to sitting through a 3-hour meeting to.
There's a risk of us, if we were to continue on our current path, there is a risk at the end that we didn't get enough comment because of lack of patience or lack of knowledge of the announcements. And then we submit it, and then there's a, raising of hands of like, whoa, wait a minute, right? Because of, we didn't. But we can guard against that through kind of like an iterative, an obvious iterative process, so where we know we're like the finish line isn't after the first review. But I'm still, I guess I'm still hesitant to, delay. I mean, I don't mind that 30-day delay, but like if we delay to 2024, who's to say that we, something else doesn't come up and we delay to 2020, whatever the next one is. I don't think it's uncommon for other states to just pick one and then use that in every 3 years update their code instead of every decade, but.
So a lot of states are
that
more
way.
than
It used to be every
6
3.
A lot of states got to go every other code.
Maryland, I think, actually has a statute that they adopt model codes at every new edition.
I think Illinois does that.
Go what?
Go Terps. He's a turtle. He's a turtle in the back.
I mean,
Sorry, I'm a Maryland grad.
Oh.
the other perspective there.
Box turtle, green heat, snapper.
I'm gonna reveal my age here, but as long as I've been practicing, we've been practicing with one code book in my career. And
You know it really well now, don't you?
Yeah. So you can imagine that there's a cohort of my peers that are in the same boat, right? And so if there's not a sense of urgency to think about updating codes right now, when is there gonna be?
As unappealing as it might sound, I've always thought, since I started working in the state, that what the commission really needs to do is have 2 code committees seated at all times, and just cycle committees as they come around. There are so many adopted codes, and they are so complex and large, and so much material, that I don't see how you can even make a pass at trying to stay current if you don't have something like that in place. That, again, is just my opinion.
That's what we asked for.
So everything's subject to change in July, depending on the legislators, right?
And I mean, we're in a situation right now where it could change, it could not change. We just don't know. And my concern is having our stakeholders putting out all of this effort, and then something does change. But then on the other hand, I also understand we pause and then nothing changes, and we've lost that time.
So
Personally, I think the best thing to do would be to move forward with the code review committees. I think that's how we're going to get the most stakeholder at the end of the day. We could work at this as hard as we can, and when it gets to the governor, he could very easily say, "No thanks, appreciate it, guys." And then that's my concern, is that if we don't consciously make an effort to make sure that we're getting buy-in and everyone knows that we're getting buy-in, that at the end of the day, we put out a really good product that gets thrown out. Go ahead, sorry, John.
I agree. I think just move down that path, propose that we delay a month and push all the deadlines for the proposed code changes out a month. and continue to move forward with what we have on our agenda, just because it'll never happen if we don't keep. Now, I lived through that for 3 years in the elevator code committee, 3 years.
You survived it.
And yeah,
Not everyone
But-
did. But you still
but,
don't have that haircut.
and we still don't have it. We're under the 2007 elevator code.
They just came out with more recent one, because I think we're trying to adopt the
We didn't-
2016.
We didn't
Well,
file-
we're trying to adopt 2016. Well, 22 is published.
Right.
You know, by the time the 16 gets adopted, the 25 will be published.
Correct.
It's my cynical, but I'm in the same boat you are. I've been in the elevator trade 37 years this year and three versions of code in 37 years.
And we had examples today.
Most of the variances are
Yeah.
because we're under the old code.
We've had multiple examples of variances where references to new, updated, additional data implemented in codes. And some of those updates are actually fiscally beneficial to the state. Like, you know, I mean, we didn't hear Costco's variance, but they're gonna save money if we were to update.
Bobby, please.
I just wanted two things to reinforce that comment. And I know you hear a lot from me about double top plates and projecting balconies and some of these things that I think have an opportunity to be cleaned up. And I don't like delaying projects for things that more modern codes have in place. They have solutions in place for these things already. And I'm telling everybody, you have to go get this variance because it violates our code, right? And the other thing I just wanted to, and I don't know how it plays into your all's thinking. I quite literally have electricians right now begging me for information about when a new electric code is going to be published. And professionals in this state think it's madness that we are still using a 2009 code that doesn't even have guidance for some of the more complicated and popular electric upgrades to buildings at this time. So I do think that there is a negative impact to staying. I also understand what happened with the 2015 and the 2018 residential code. Maybe a small pause makes some sense, but I did want to just let you know that we have professionals in this state who believe that we are operating on a very, very old code, and they believe it to the detriment of the people in the state.
Is there anybody attending virtually who'd like to make a comment?
Yes, if I might.
Yes.
My name's Chuck White. I'm in South Bend, Indiana. I work for the Plumbing, Heating, and Cooling Contractors National Association. I sit on the International Plumbing Code Technical Committee, the Uniform Plumbing Code Technical Committee, the National Standard Plumbing Code Technical Committee. So I've been around the block a time or two with codes. I know there are problems out there. I had a local inspector, a local contractor talk to me about a local inspector that would not approve a urinal because the standard for the urinal doesn't match what's in our 2006 printed book, but those standard numbers had been harmonized and it was a little bit of moving heaven and earth to get it approved. So there are issues like that in the old books that we need to get addressed. And waiting forever makes the project much more work because you have to, as you mentioned earlier, the margin marks disappear on every edition. You know, we're 5 editions behind on the plumbing code, about to be 6. And you have to go back and find all that stuff. If this stuff could get done on a more routine basis, it makes the job significantly easier, significantly. The other thing I wonder about we're sort of reinventing the wheel because all of this happens in a public forum with the International Code Council over that 3-year code cycle. They have a request for public proposals. They have a review. They have a technical committee review. They have a code official review. There is a long process to getting these things in there, and there's plenty of opportunity to weigh in, provide comments, look at this through the process so that you don't have to wait until the book is final before you know what's going to be in it. And so my job for the National Association is to do some of this. And I had a contracting business, plumbing contracting business in South Bend that kind of was a victim of COVID. And I've also taught apprentices for over 30 years. And the apprentices are always wondering when's the next one coming and when do we teach the right thing? So there's opportunity for engagement. I think delaying the process, if you want a 30-day delay, I guess, but it has to keep moving forward. If there's a decision made at some point to move to the 2024, it will be a matter of just evaluating the few changes between the 21 and the 24. And there are some changes. They're not horrendous. I mean, it's rare to have these updates that make radical changes, but there still are some changes to be looked at and evaluated. So I thank Dustin for letting me know the meeting was happening so I could weigh in. I'm kind of on the docket here for some of my amendments, but I think it's important that you move forward in the right direction. If you wait and nothing happens with the other, you've lost time. If you know something's going to change on the other, then you just have to adjust what you've already done. Thank you.
Appreciate your input, Chuck. Thank you. Does anybody else have any comment attending virtually?
Archie has a hand up, is that?
Archie's hand's been up for hours.
He's tired.
I know, Archie, you're stronger than
Probably
me.
done.
Back up. Okay.
I mean, not to sound like a knucklehead, but where are we as the board, the commission, in the process? Are we the first? Are we the last as far as the steps that are taken on each code? Like the plumbing codes.
As far as the
Are we the final stop or?
No, the governor's the final stop.
Well, we're next to the final?
No. The Attorney General's next to the governor.
Okay.
So-
Does a very nice job of explaining if somebody's can bring it up.
Yeah, there's a great flow
Good
chart
flow
on
charts,
the
the
commission website.
lifesaver.
If I ever get time to get in there.
If you work usually comes first, and you got all these other steps to jump through, I'm calling them steps.
Yeah, the product that would come out of the commission is the draft proposed rule. So it's like the very beginning product for the rulemaking process.
And then you get shot down at any step of that
You have the
process.
public hearing, which they can submit more
Yeah.
amendments to or change what's in the proposed rule. And then that has to go through the process as well.
That is these days.
Not off the top of my head.
Send me the link.
It was very easy to find it, ever on there, sorry.
They completely changed the website.
I know, I found it though.
Well, if you found it, it's there.
It's in the rulemaking process, if I'm not mistaken. Once the commission's happy, then the notice is published for a proposed rule. Everything is proposed, nothing is finalized until that governor's signature is on it. And the governor can recall at the last minute, which has happened before to this commission, 1985.
Undue pressure to the governor.
Don't know, it was recalled. All the codes were recalled.
Just
Mr. Poppich?
Yes.
I mean, I think one thing Mr. White said that I'd like to reiterate and get your feedback on, because I think you're more familiar with the way LCC works than I am. But he said to the effect that, these codes are not something that are just willy-nilly made. And I'm hoping that we can reiterate that point, that these model codes that we're referencing have a lot of committee and thought put into it.
I've made that very clear in different meetings that I've been in. And oftentimes the response that I get is that's fine, but that's all done at a national level and that doesn't take into account Indiana. Specific housing in Indiana, affordable housing across the state, industries in Indiana. It's hard to argue against that. It is a consensus process, but if you look at the model code, for instance, the model residential code requires sprinklers in every 1 or 2 family home. Indiana, obviously, we have a statutory prohibition to ever requiring that, but even then, I don't think that's ever been sought across the state to my knowledge. I don't know of any organizations that have been fighting to do that. And in the vast, I think 49 states amend that out. I remember, I believe California and Maryland, I think, are the only 2 states that adopt that in some fashion. There's a lot of stuff in the model code that gets amended out. And how that stuff got into the code, there were different organizations, different interest groups that got their voices heard and showed up to vote. It's a governmental voting process, so anyone can make the code change proposals. Anybody can speak at the public hearings. It's only governmental voting members who actually vote to put what is in the code into the code. That being said, there are things in the code that, I think I've said enough.
I think if you look at the code change proposals we received for the codes that we're doing, a lot of them, the justification is this was an amendment to the previous code. So they've been carried from code to code to code to code. And so we should presumably keep doing it because we did it before.
And that's why both the residential code and the electrical code committee, we specifically stated in the bylaws that no amendments were being carried forward automatically. If anybody wanted to carry something forward, we wanted to discuss it fresh. Why are we bringing this forward? And there were a number of amendments proposed to the electrical code that when we said, why is this being brought forward? The proponent said, well, because it was in the old code. I said, but this doesn't apply to the new code anymore. He said, well, I'm not in support of it. I said, well, then why did you propose it if you're not in support of it? He goes, well, I'm going to vote against it. So why don't you just withdraw it? He did. And, we had numerous proposals just withdrawn, but just out of habit, he'd been in numerous electrical code committees over the years. And so he just automatically put in a proposal for every current amendment. And we had a gentleman do the same thing with the residential code. Every amendment from 2005 was brought forward to the 2018 model code. And again, there were some where it just didn't apply and whatnot, and we had to address those, but we had that discussion. And I guess we've had a good discussion. Does anybody have any new thoughts or any additional thoughts before we take this to a vote on what we're going to do?
I'm still learning.
And that's completely fine. We all are. The day I quit learning, I need to retire. I tell my inspectors that all the time. The day they quit learning, retire. Because there's always something changing in this industry.
Always.
There's new technology, there's a new construction method, there's a new code, there's a new amendment, there's always something new to learn. When you become complacent and you stop learning, go find something else to do.
Some flowers on the side of the highway or something.
There's new types of flowers, man. So is it 30 days or is it until the May meeting? Because the May meeting gets us past the end of the session. You know, do we resume this discussion on Cinco de Mayo?
I would propose we do it to the next meeting, which would be April.
Okay.
Because legislation could progress or not, right? And it, you know, and then that could be an indicator for us and we get 30 days back. So, but if we get to April and things are progressing, there's still uncertainty, we can kick it another month.
I agree with that. All right, so how do we want to put that in the form of a motion?
You could move to delay the current rulemaking schedule for an amount of time equal to the time between here and the April meeting.
Shift everything. the
Yeah,
current
just shift
schedule out
everything.
to April meeting, so that the mechanical code comments will be due April 4th.
Okay.
And that'll give people another month to do mechanical code comments right now.
We can give them until April 5th, which is our next meeting.
We can.
May 5th is the main meeting, so.
April 4th is our next one.
Oh, but ideally, it was supposed to be the meeting.
Mechanical code would be
yeah.
April.
Man, it's been a long day. Right.
So we pause on acting on the plumbing code, things that are remaining. We pause on the fuel gas code, and we pause on the mechanical code until submissions are now due April. And then everything beyond that will shift out.
And we'll continue taking submittals to the smart sheet. Exactly. Anybody can make a submittal. We're just not going to hear them.
That's another thing that I wonder if people realize, like, you can make submissions to any code at any time prior to the deadline.
Now it's out in October.
Yeah, it's just like,
I don't know if people understood that.
I don't know, I don't know that they did, and that's, again, you know, I thought we were being clear, but the more I hear from stakeholders, the more confusion I'm hearing. And that's why I'm trying to, I want to make sure that everybody's getting their voice heard.
I mean, would it be beneficial to complete our agenda today with the plumbing code comments, since we already have them, in lieu of kicking that a month, or?
I would prefer to pause, just full stop, pause. And Chuck, I apologize, you're Chuck White, you're on here. At the same time, we'd only be going for an hour and 15 minutes anyway, because I promised everybody a 4:30 hard stop. Unless
I
we're on
certainly
variances.
understand.
What about fuel gas codes? That'll be on pause and comments will still be.
Well, we had no submittals.
I mean,
So if we get submittals for fuel gas, then it'll go onto the agenda after the plumbing code.
So I'm sorry, I mean,
Please.
so I didn't look. Went through I read through the book, fuel gas, but how many amendments were there to the old fuel gas?
I just looked at the old fuel gas code. It's 5 pages long. The Indiana, this Article 25 and 675. You know, the first section is administrative
And that's
and
always
definition. So, and all that's going to get changed, right? So,
You're gonna have amendments, chapter
Not
one, you're gonna have a couple, you're gonna have a couple definitions changes with like approved, listed, labeled, stuff like that.
And I didn't look to see were those things actually resolved from ICC. Yes, were those issues resolved with ICC? So we didn't have to have, I don't know if there's not very many.
a lot of it, I didn't read them all. Like the definitions are all things that just reference it back to Indiana code. So that's, you know, is what it is. But the actual amendments, I don't know. There's not very many.
Instead of just pushing all the deadlines, do we just make a motion to reevaluate the deadlines for submission, and then we'll look at each of the codes for the April meeting? That way we kind of kick the can and we can look at what legislation allows us to do. If it's say we're only able to do 2 codes, maybe we readjust our schedule completely next month with here's our top priorities.
Possible.
Or we have nothing that we're going to move on because we don't know.
We don't lose I feel like if we shift a month, we still have momentum that we, where if we say, we're gonna scrap it and come back and reevaluate, then we've lost all momentum.
Yeah.
Bingo.
Makes sense.
If it's up in the air whether we're going to be able to do any, we finish with plumbing, what we have left, and we've already dedicated some time into that.
Right, in April, we can finish plumbing.
Right.
Fuel gas.
And fuel gas, if we can either bring amendments from the floor as commissioners, or we punt that one down to the end when we do the cleanup round.
But if we're talking about, extending it in such a way that we can take additional fuel gas proposals, wouldn't that push the schedule up?
We're not saying take additional.
Okay.
We're saying push mechanical code.
Okay. That's what I was misunderstanding. Never mind. I was just gonna be like, that's 2 months, I think. But yeah, if it's just the 1 month, then.
Any deadline that has not passed, which would include today, is kicked
Okay.
30 days. 30 days.
To the next meeting, which is not necessarily 30 days.
Oh, yeah, to the next.
Kick to the next meeting and beyond.
Shift it down one.
It has a whole nother month.
Yeah.
And then Ed can relax for a month and then.
All right,
Probably need a formal motion from somebody.
we do. So I'll make it, I guess. So I make a motion, or am I not supposed to as chair?
You can make a motion, Jim always made a motion.
That's true. I like chair. Do whatever you want. You're the chair. Jim, if you're watching, I know you're not, you're on the golf course.
In Florida.
I make a motion to extend the current submittal deadline for all of the code deadlines that have not passed to extend to the next meeting, the following meeting of the commission. Did you word that somehow appropriately?
Yes, working on it.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so let's try, motion to extend the current submittal deadline for all code deadlines that have not already passed to the next proposed submittal deadline.
I think that accomplishes it, yes.
You may want to just say, beginning with the mechanical code, deadline is now April 4th. And all subsequently scheduled codes would be meeting after that, the meetings after that.
Second. All right, we'll do a roll call vote or a hand vote, or how do we want to do this?
You can just do a simple voice vote unless you think there's gonna be big opposition.
Start with a voice vote, see where it goes.
All in favor, signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, motion carried. So we are jumping forward, closing comments. I have spoken enough today. I appreciate all of your patience. I will see you all.
I'm trying.
See you all on May 4th. We're adjourned. It's 3:19. April 4th. We're still adjourned. It's 3:19.